go to the public comment on non-agenda items and see if we have anyone here with us. You know, folks, for attendees, I see city staff members, and we thank them for being here. I don't see anybody for public comments right now, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment portion. I see the city clerk kind of letting me know that she doesn't have anybody. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment and move on to the work session item for fire pension A and the information from city staff and our guests tonight. So I think I'll turn it over to the city manager to get us started. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor. Whoops, I lost my camera. Hi, everybody. I think I'm back now. So not being ready to go first, I'm pulling up my material, but I will share with you that I wanted to give a brief introduction this evening of this topic. Councilors, I know many of you, particularly folks who've served multiple terms, you are familiar with this issue to some degree. The state has been working dutifully on this issue through the Joint Appropriations Committee for the past year, I'd say, very seriously and methodically. And in October, the Joint Appropriations Committee did, in fact, finalize a piece of draft legislation that they anticipate moving to the full body of the legislature for consideration with the legislative session upcoming here in January and February of 2022. So I've prepared the cover sheet and background information that is in your packet. It's fairly self-explanatory. I don't want to go over it in its entirety and steal the thunder of our guests this evening, but I will share with you that from a city standpoint, there is a significant lack of funding to the tune of some $100 million in Fire Pension A. City of Laramie has not had a member participating in that pension and working for the city since 2010, but the cities are being engaged in the solution to solve the problem in the fund. And so for the City of Laramie, the JAC bill that was drafted in October would tap the cities for a total of $20 million. And I shouldn't just say cities, let me clarify, tap the employers, many of whom are cities, but not all of whom are cities. They would be participating to the tune of $20 million, split proportionately across those cities based on the number of pensioners the city has participating. For this city, that means that about 18.4% of the $20 million will be attributed to the City of Laramie through a loan. I called it in the cover sheet a compulsory loan because it's not a loan we've applied for, but it will be a loan that this legislation will push to the city and then seek repayment over 20 years for. Our annual payments right now are estimated to be $184,000 per year, and that would be through 2041 or 2042. I wasn't quite clear on that. So with that, I will leave the remainder of the information for our guest this evening, and that is Mr. Swindell. He's the director of the Wyoming Retirement System, and he could provide any further or more detailed background as you may have questions in that regard, and then also can kind of talk through what is anticipated to occur from now through the end of the legislative session. And David, anything else you'd like to address? So please, with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Swindell, unless you have any questions for me, Council.
Council, do we have any questions for the city manager about that background piece? This is not the first time we've heard about this topic. I don't see any hands popping up. So yeah, Mr. Swindell, we thank you for being here, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for having me. Janine, that was a great introduction. I've reviewed the materials that were in your council packet, and thank you very much for giving me a few minutes here to talk with your council. It's your work session on hump day before the Thanksgiving weekend. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Riverton, and then I went to West Point and was an Army officer for 22 years. And then I was in city business out in Idaho. I was the finance director for the city of Pocatello. It's a city of 55,000, metro area 80,000. I know I did that for 13 years. I've been to hundreds of such work sessions. So I greatly appreciate everyone's attention tonight. I appreciate what you do. Every city is unique, but there's kind of a family, and I still consider myself part of the family. So thanks very much. I wanted to spend maybe just 2 minutes just reminding the council of what the Wyoming retirement system is and does. I've been with the system for 7 years. We have more than 34,000 retirees in the system. We have 41,000 active contributing working employees. We have more than $10 billion under management in our investment portfolio. In the last year, we paid out $727 million in benefits. 79% of that money, about $572 million last year, stays in Wyoming. And in WRS, you can run it by zip code, and WRS paid $45 million to retirees in the city of Laramie last year. There were 1,751 payees. So $45 million go into your city. That's about 6.2% of our total payments are going to retirees that reside in the city of Laramie. That's a fair number, but if you think about it, with the state university and all the activities over there, there's a fair number of retirees in your area. The city of Laramie has about 254 active employees that are members of our system, at least as it was in the actuarial reports at the beginning of the year. You had 52 in the law enforcement plan. Those are your police officers. Fire B, those are your paid firefighters. We'll distinguish Fire B from Fire A in a moment when we get into the Fire A conversation. I promise to need just one more minute. And you have 157 employees in the public employee plan. 84 of those are in Tier 1 and 73 of those were in Tier 2. And we also run a deferred compensation program, a 457 plan, but the city of Laramie does not participate in that. I believe you have one with ICMA and maybe one other one with another provider. A little bit about Fire A. The memo, I think, discussed the legislation and the potential, and of course that's the issue of the moment. But let me remind the council of just some issues in Fire A so you understand kind of where this came from. Because it isn't anybody's fault that's on this call. It's just a situation that we have to deal with as a legacy. If you go back far enough to 1935, the Wyoming Firemen's Pension Plan dates back that far. Like many pension plans, it was amongst the public safety people, it had some of the earliest pension plans in the United States. The plan was managed by various city or state departments over the years. It wasn't managed by WRS until 1981. It was about that time, in 1981, the plan was severely underfunded. They had $257,000 in the bank and $17 million in liabilities. They were broke. The Wyoming Legislature convened several task forces and reformed the Fireman's Pension Fund in 1981. They split the plan into two plans. There was Fire B, which was for new hires after 1 July 1981, and then there was the legacy plans for people that had been hired prior to 1 July 1981. And the legislature engaged in a series of appropriations and revenue flows from the fire insurance premium tax to flow about $46 million into the fund between 1981 and 1996. The plan was to amortize the unfunded liability of the pension plan over 20 years. They succeeded in only about 13 years, but because by 1994, the plan was 100% funded. And the markets were strong. And those of us who were around in the financial markets in the 1990s know that the returns were quite large. And the pension became overfunded. The legislature ceased their funding to it in 1996. And in April of 1997, legislation was enacted that ceased contributions from firemen and from employers in the Fire A plan. In addition, there was a benefit increase. The plan continued to be overfunded, and there was more benefit increases in 2000 and a big benefit increase in 2001. Well, now that's getting to be about 20 years ago, and those of us who were around about 20 years ago now remember the dot-com recession. So about the time they increased benefits, then the funding went down because of a market crash. The funding declined to about 90% in 2003, but in fairness, the fund did recover. It was above 100% again in 2008, just barely. They had lost all their cushion. And then the Great Recession happened, It put the funding down to 84%, and then it's been on a declining status ever since. And the situation has had gotten pretty critical. In 2010, the actuaries estimated, now something's got to be done, because if something isn't done, the fund's going to run out of money. There's no way you can invest your way out of this problem. It's not going to be like the dot-com era. The situation was such that there was another bill that was eventually debated in the 2014 session. That was House Bill 51. It passed the House, but failed in the Senate. That bill would have put in about $38 million from the state to stabilize the fund actuarially. And then there would have been a remaining unfunded liability that would have been assessed to the 9 legacy employers. As Janine stated, most of these are cities. There are 6 cities and 3 county elements involved with this. The big players are the city of Casper, of course, and the city of Cheyenne, both with about roughly 30% of the problem. So between them, you got 60. And then Laramie is somewhat of a player with close to 18% of the problem, or it depends on how you define the problem as benefits going out or number of pensioners. We'll get to that in a moment. The other players, about the same percentage, a little less, is the city of Sheridan, and the city of Rock Springs has a role in this, and then the city of Rawlins has they're a fairly small player in this. So those are the 6 cities that are involved: Casper, Cheyenne, Laramie, Sheridan, Rock Springs, and Rawlins. And then there are 3 county elements, just so you know. There's Campbell County Fire Protection District, Natrona County Fire District, and then Natrona County Airport Fire Department. Those are the 3 county elements. So there's 9 legacy employers in Fire A. Fire A had no new employees, of course, after 1981. The bill failed in the Senate, so there wasn't any fix in 2014, and everybody was so bruised about it, they haven't wanted to pick up that baton again. The bill would have required cities to pay some part of the unfunded liability over 15 years. Reading the tea leaves, I think Laramie's share was going to be, I've got it here. They were going to pay about $181,000 per year for 15 years, had that bill passed. The bill didn't pass. And so but the situation has gotten critical. The actuaries now estimate the fund is down to less than 90 million. I think it was actually down to 77 million here at the end of September, because the payouts are about 16 million a year. And it has an automatic 3% COLA that's required by law. And so benefits keep going up, even though the population is shrinking. And they're going to run out of money, I believe, in June of 2026. The Wyoming Retirement Board put the funds into a short-term safe money market investment on 1 January 2021 to safeguard the fund against a market downturn. Because if the stock market turns south and you have a 10% correction or something like that, the depletion date could be accelerated. Instead of 5 years, you could be talking 3.5 pretty easily. So that's why the board did that. And of course, the stock market's been really strong for the last 10 months. And we've left some money on the table. And I do apologize on behalf of the board for that, but it was a necessary move. The legislature, as Janine stated, has been engaged in this effort. I have a lot of legislators to thank because nobody wants to deal with this. I think that's the thing that I would emphasize to Mayor, to you and your council. The state doesn't want to put money into it. The pensioners don't want to give up their COLA. The employers don't want to put any money into it. The retirement system is tired of trying to manage this thing. There is nobody happy on it. This is one of those elements in public policy. Well, we're not happy until you're not happy. And you know how things can be driven that way. So anyway, that's where we're at. The legislature did not deal with this in the 2021 session. Instead, what they did is they appointed a working group of 2 senators and 2 legislators out of their body to work it over the session. And they have met numerous times. We've worked with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities to have several meetings. And we've had 3 formal sessions with the full Joint Appropriations Committee on 15 June, on 9 September, and most recently on 25 October. The result of all of that at this point is a draft bill, which has been known as 22 LSO 0125, that the committee filled in a bunch of X's on the 25 October meeting. And the elements of the bill are as stated in the memo in your packet. The state's going to put in $55 million. They're going to actually put in another $20 million, which is characterized as a loan to the cities that will be paid back to the treasurer. And interestingly enough, what the Wyoming retirement system is not going to be involved with those repayments. The payments are going to be made by the legacy employers in a manner and timing as determined by the treasurer, and the payments actually go into the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Fund. I think it's a clever way to give the legislature control of the repayments. I'm not sure. Anyway, so that's for the fund, though. That's $75 million that goes into the fund. And then there's another issue. They're going to take 40% of the fire insurance premium tax revenue that currently goes to the volunteer firefighters fund, leaving them with 60%, taking a 40% portion, and that's about $2 million a year. And they're going to flow that into Fire A on a permanent basis. The funding that results from all that will stabilize the fund. The fund will not fail, and it will achieve full funding probably in 2037, 2038. It all depends upon markets and whether assumptions are met. It is reasonably robust in the face of adverse investments. You could drop 100 basis points off the plan per year on a steady state, and the fund still survives. That's pretty good. So actuarially, it's fairly strong. Senator Hicks put in some increased money. It was going to be $15 million from the cities and $50 million from the state, and he asked for $5 million from both to make the fund more robust. A little bit about the history then. As stated in your memo, the city of Laramie, the last working plant person under Fire A retired in 2009. So since 2010, you haven't had any active firefighters in Fire A. There are, at present, I think in the information that I sent to the city clerk, there was 266 pensioners at the beginning of the year. There has been some mortality loss. We're down to 258. Of the 258 pensioners in the plan, there are, I've got a number here. The majority are firefighters, but there's a substantial number that are surviving spouses. We're down to 258, and of those, 37 have a legacy from the city of Laramie. There are 27 firefighter retirees and 10 survivor spouses. And that equals 14.3% of the remaining 258. That's instructive because that's the formula for the repayment of the loan. In the previous editions, it was going to be a proportion of dollars going out, which is closer to about 18%. The payout that's going to the city of Laramie right now is $240,000 a month to those 37 pensioners. The average payment is $6,501 for the retirees. And there's one retiree that has been retired for 32 years. He retired in 1989. And the shortest since retirement is the person that retired in 2009. He's been retired for 12 years. 15 of the 27 retirees retired in June of 1999 or later, and that implies that they had at least a couple of years of service when nobody paid any contributions. The one person that retired in 2009, he went 12 years in working for the city of Laramie, but nobody put any contributions in from the employer or the employee because everybody thought that the fund corpus would be big enough. So what that means is that in the draft bill, if it passes as is, we'll see if that happens, the $20 million will be paid back in proportion by the 9 legacy employers, and Laramie's share would be about $143,000 because you make up 14.3% of the payees or the pensioners under the plan. which is a little different than the previous numbers, which are in your memo. I think it says 184,000. That would have been right as a proportion of benefits, which was one previous version, but that was another change to the legislation that has gone through its path. What do we expect to happen now? Well, first of all, I want everybody to know about this plan. I want everybody to know about your pensioners. And like I say, nobody really likes this. Nobody wants to deal with it, but nobody wants to see the 258 pensioners go without a payment. No one wants to see your 37 legacy pensioners go without a payment. They are going to give up their COLA. It's going to go to 3%. That's part of the bargain. The state will put in money, and then the state's going to loan you money and ask the legacy employers to pay it back on a no interest loan. This is a fairly good deal. Bob McLaurin from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities has been my principal contact with WAM. He regards it as a fair deal. Stuart McCrae was the city manager in Sheridan. He spoke at the 9 September hearing in favor of such a plan, as did the city manager of the city of Casper. At the 25 October session, I don't think they were there, they were listening, but Mayor Pat Collins from the city of Cheyenne spoke in favor of the plan, including the amendment from 15 to 20 million, saying it was a legacy that that his city needed to participate in. Having said that, I don't expect anyone to be really happy about the prospect of having another obligation from the city. I know what that means to the size of Laramie. It's not an easy pill to swallow. But on the other hand, we don't want the pension plan to get bust. The Wyoming Retirement Board, I work for an 11-person board consisting of the state treasurer and 10 appointees appointed by the governor. The board's position is they are not in favor of any particular solution because we don't want to advocate for one group versus another, but we are in favor of a solution. And that is also the position of Governor Gordon when I've talked to him. Mayor Weaver, that concludes my remarks. I stand for any questions from you, members of your staff, or members of your council. And again, thank you for having me. And if we are remiss in anything, I do want to take this opportunity to thank you for your service and wish everybody a happy and safe Thanksgiving holiday.
Well, thank you, Mr. Swindell. I don't think we're gonna cut you loose just yet, because I anticipate there will be some questions and a little bit of discussion here. I'd like to check with city staff to see if they have any follow-up to any of what was shared by Mr. Swindell before I open it up for council questions. So, City Manager, I'm just going to go back to you just briefly and see if you have anything you'd like to add.
Mayor, I do not. Thank you.
All right. Council, who's up? Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. David, just curious, this has been mulling around for quite some time now, and I'm just wondering from your standpoint, how confident are you that the legislature will do something in the session next year?
That's a really good question, and I wish I had a confident answer, Councilman Gabriel. I do think, having talked to Representative Nicholas, who's the co-chair of the Joint Appropriations Committee on the House side, that he says there will be a bill. He's confident that he can get it through the House. The problem's going to be the Senate. On the other hand, I do think that this has some legs to it. Senator Hicks is the vice chair on the Senate side in the Joint Appropriation Committee. He made the motion to have the committee work the bill, and he's been involved in it. And I think if we have Senator Hicks on our side, then it's got a chance to get through the Senate. The Senate is going to be the hard nut, and that is also politically why this is going to start as a Senate file and not a House bill. The way it works is that when you have a committee bill, this is a joint committee. So the committee worked the bill, they voted in favor of it, but that doesn't pass the bill. That doesn't do anything at the committee level. What that means is it will enter the budget session as a committee-sponsored bill. That clears the first hurdle because in budget sessions, other than the budget, every bill has to be approved to get into the budget session because it's supposed to be about the budget, right? And the committee bills are an exception to that. If it's been approved by a committee, then it will be considered by the body. And that's not true of any other bill. You can introduce a bill as a legislator, but the first hurdle is to even let the body allow it to be heard. So in some ways, it's already passed its first vote. It will be heard, and it will start as a Senate file, so it will be referred to the Senate Appropriations Committee for a hearing. They know the bill. I think it will pass Senate Appropriations. The fight is going to be on the Senate floor, and that's where we're going to be at risk. That's its first real hurdle.
And you talked about the COLA concession for the individuals involved. That seems to me like a pretty big step.
Well, it is, and in the past, that's been part of the issues on it. The pensioners represent, they've hired an attorney, Pat Crank, a former attorney general of the state, well-known attorney in the state, was hired. He represented the fire aid retirees, and any mention of reducing their negotiated COLA has always been met with strong resistance. However, and in the face of the issues, they've been on that, and they were at the hearing, and they said that they would not fight the reduction to the COLA. The COLA has been a mandatory minimum 3% since 1994. Before that, it went on the average wage increase of firemen, maximum fireman's first-class salary in a survey across the states. Administrative burden, to say the least. But anyway, it got modified in 1994 to be a minimum of 3% and a maximum of 5%. The board has always awarded the minimum, but that is the legal minimum, and the COLA is one of the issues. For the other pension plans, as you know, ever since the Great Recession, all pension plans across the United States encountered some funding problems. And one of the, so we all instituted pension reforms. That's where increased contributions came from. That's where Tier 2 came from. And that's also where the reduction in COLAs come from. We haven't paid a COLA in the public employee plan since 2008. But Fire A has continued to receive a 3% COLA. They believe it is part of their negotiated and agreed upon benefit package, and it's part of the contract. So it's been a big deal. Saving the COLA or eliminating the COLA saves some money in the short run. The big benefit is in the long run. Once you start talking about 10 years out, 15 years out, and so on, that's when it really starts to save some money. Eliminating the COLA today and just doing that only buys you about 6 to 9 months in the depletion. Instead of June of 2026, maybe you'll push it into early 2027, but the fund still fails. Councilman, did that answer your question? That may be more information than you wanted.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Oh, and by the way, I should mention, it is mentioned in the memo, yeah, I've been sued. The agency's been sued. I've been sued by name by Pat Crank. The lawsuit seeks to combine Fire A with Fire B and make a claim on the Fire B assets to pay the remaining Fire A liabilities. The council should understand that if you were to do that, it does extend out the time frame because Fire A is a healthy plan. They'll be above 100% here in a year or two. They're already at 100% on a market value basis. I'll explain all that. I don't care about that. Anyway, Fire B is healthy, but they're not so healthy that they can carry this huge unfunded Fire A burden. The combined plan would also fail in about 24 to 26 years. The WRS board is a little concerned about that because, well, that's a natural kick the can down the road argument, and we really would like to get this put away. The Fire B folks, and if you talk to any of your folks in the current pension plan, all of your current firefighters, they are adamant that they don't want to be combined with Fire A, that they are separate from Fire A, and that Fire A's liabilities should not damage their pension, which is healthy. But anyway, that lawsuit was filed. It went into district court in Laramie County. Judge Rogers sought to certify that directly to the Supreme Court because everyone figures that no matter what the district court does, it's going to get appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court recently decided no, They weren't going to accept certification, so they sent it back to the district court. Now Judge Rogers has to make a decision. In light of the activity of the 25 October JAC meeting, however, all of the parties realized that, frankly, the lawsuit just needs to be put in abeyance depending upon if there's a legislative solution and what that finally looks like. So all the parties signed on to a motion to stay the proceedings until 1 April 2022. And then Judge Rogers hasn't actually ruled on that motion yet, but I think she will, because I think she understands it the same way everybody does, that it's probably just ought to wait and see if the legislature solves this. The lawsuit could be moot, or maybe not. We'll see where it goes.
Other questions, Councilmember Harrington?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Swindell, forgive me for not knowing a lot about how pension plans function. This may be a pretty base level question for someone in your position, but what happens to the funds when everyone in the fund has passed away? Because there is sort of this benchmark time, and this is just a legacy plan, it stands to reason that by the time we've paid this off by 2041, a majority of the retirees serving in this fund will no longer be with us. And I don't want to dwell on that part, but we're aiming at this like long-term solution. And so I guess I'm curious why we're making an incredibly healthy fund that will be at 100% in 2037, I think you said, that to me, and not knowing much about how pension funds function, seems like that may not be the time that it needs to be at 100%.
Well, actually, what you want to do is you want to be at 100% as soon as possible. And I'll explain that. But when I talk about funding ratios, well, 100%, 41%, all those numbers I threw out, here's the deal. You have a certain amount of money in the bank. Like I say, we have $10 billion under management right now. So you have a market value of your assets. That's pretty clear. And you can schmooze that, and that's what we do. We're a little conservative. We sometimes talk about actuarial value of the assets. That means we only book 1/5 of, we smooth over 5 years. So we only book 1/5 of each year's gain or loss. But that's kind of details, inside baseball stuff. It's the market value of your assets. And then you compare that to the present value of your liabilities. You can think about it this way. As you know, a pensioner is going to be paid this year, next year, and there's an expected lifespan for, say, a retiree that retired today. And then there's all your active employees that are almost retirees. Janine wants to retire someday. We know how old she is. We know how much service credit she's picked up, and we have certain probabilities of whether she'll retire and what her benefit will be. So we project her benefit out. We do the same thing for a 22-year-old that just joined your organization. And we have certain other assumptions that are built in for disabilities, for people that will die in service and get a death penalty. Anyway, every year you wind up with, here's how much money you're going to need. And then you discount that back to have the present value of that, because some of those payments aren't due for 30 years, right? Some of those payments aren't due for 60 years. When are we going to start paying those benefits for your 22-year-old? In some cases, those benefits are, by the time she's 80, those benefits are out 60 years. So you discount that all back to present value using the assumed rate of return on your investments for the plan. And then you compare the two. If you've got enough money in the bank to equal the present value of your liabilities, you're 100% funded. If you have less than that, well, you're 80 or 90% of that. And if you're overfunded, well, maybe you go a little bit, but it'll all change next year anyway. The reason you want to put in money now, why the legislative plan is pretty big, because big money comes in all at once. $55 million from the state, actually $75 million from the state, 20 of which is going to be paid back by legacy employers. All this money comes in at once so that my chief investment officer can make money on it. And that's money you don't have to contribute, and that nobody has to contribute. Wall Street will produce that for us. And so you want to be as fully funded as you can, as quickly as you can, so that you can have most of the pension costs paid by the markets and not by the employees or the employers. Any traditional pension, including your existing public pension fund, is mainly paid for with investment earnings. In the public employee plan rated last year, and if you look at it over the last decade, 70% of the public employee plan's expenses were met by investment earnings, and only 30% were met by contributions from either the employee or the employer. That makes it a great bargain for the taxpayer and for your city. And so that's why you want to put money in now to get it to a healthy status. And then politically, there's another aspect. That's financial and actuarial, and that's pension speak. Now let me talk politics. Boy, you've been hearing about this for a while, right? Yeah, so is the legislature. And it's almost verbatim from Senator Hicks. I don't think I've got it quite right, but he said it pretty well. He says, look, I just want to put enough money in this plan so we don't have to deal with this again. And that's the legislature's attitude. They fixed this once. Now they're going to have to fix it again. They do not want to fix it a third time. And I also think that that echoes former Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman, still on the House, representative from Casper, well known in the state. I talked to him a couple years ago as to why the 2014 bill failed, but mostly why it hadn't gotten picked up again in 2015 or 2016. He says, the thing of it was, we rolled that boulder up the hill, and then we thought we had it, and it rolled back on us, and everybody got so bruised in the process, nobody wants to mess with it again. So there's a real attitude in the legislature politically to put this on a status to fix it so that they can forget about it. So can you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, Mr. Swindell, I certainly appreciate that. I guess maybe my real question would be what happens to the funds, following the, so I guess what I'm getting at is you made a comment earlier that the repayment, sorry, she's out of order fairly often.
It's all in order. It's a Zoom call. You're good.
What happens to these funds? We're paying them back to the LISRA. This to me feels very much like a way for the cities to pick up, for the legislature really to profit off of this on behalf of this.
Maybe. I saw that that gets into internal politics with
Sure.
the Joint Appropriations Committee, of course. And I see that. It looks to me like, hey, they're going to pay the money back, but then the legislature is going to gradually gain control of this. And as part of the budget stabilization fund that the legislature controls. And they're always looking for ways to put money into the to the LISRA, as you stated. From the funding perspective, in the end, the existing legislation says that if there's ever, first of all, how long is this going to take to pay off all 258 pensioners? Some of them are still fairly young. You got to remember this is a public safety fireman's retirement fund, and some of these folks retired in their late 40s or early 50s. The average retiree is 73. That's not that old, really. There's some mortality. We've seen some this year, but in the main, you're not going to have serious mortality in this group until they get into their mid 80s, about 10 or 15 years from now. And then there's this 100% contingent annuity payment to their spouse. And some of these people married or remarried fairly young people. We don't expect the final pensioner to be paid off until 2082. Now, you may get a little, it'll be pretty small. You may get down to 10 people somewhere in there, but there'll be pensioners in this fund probably until 2082. At least that's the actuary's estimate. So it's going to have to pay out. Interestingly enough, when you look at the legislation, the money that's going in actually doesn't go into fire a pension fund trust. The legal theory being that once you put it into the pension trust, you can't get it back out. And so they avoided that. The money goes into a Fire A reserve fund, which is separate. And the Fire A reserve fund, we're going to spend down Fire A until it exhausts, and then we're going to tap the reserve fund as needed. At the end of the day, when the final pensioner is paid off, any remaining balance in the Fire A reserve fund reverts to the state's general fund. That's the way the legislation reads.
Thanks.
The previous legislation, the existing legislation says that if there's anything left in Fire A, it goes to Fire B. But this legislation would change that.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions? Vice Mayor Pierce?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Weaver, and thank you, Mr. Swindell, for spending some time with us tonight. I really appreciate your time and the information that you, as well as our city manager, has provided. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding when and why they decided to ask the municipalities or these 9 other entities for funds. I mean, it seems to me to be a state problem that they, in reality, created and should be responsible for, and now they're coming back and asking the communities for funds. And please don't misunderstand, because I think, you know, these folks provided a service. The firemen provided great service. They deserve and need a pension. But I can't connect the dots. Like, why are they coming to the municipalities for this, or to the employers, I guess might be the correct word.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Pierce, that's a great perspective. I understand that. There's a lot of perspectives as to who's responsible and then who ought to pay on this. And that is, of course, one perspective is that the legislature did this. They had ultimate authority over this fund. And that's frankly one perspective that the WRS board has, is that I'm just the manager. I couldn't, you know, everybody else, we cut off COLAs in 2008. We're still paying COLAs in Fire A. Why is that? Mandatory by statute. And so it was the legislature that mandates the benefit level and mandates the lack of contributions. It's all a matter of statute. And if you think in public policy, or frankly in any position of leadership, you know, with authority comes responsibility. And so the legislature had ultimate authority over this plan. Therefore, some say they bear ultimate responsibility. And that is the argument to have the state put in money, is they had authority over it, and with authority comes responsibility. Okay, there's another perspective though, and I've heard this one. The other perspective is, I don't know why the state's putting any money into this. I mean, this is a city problem. These were city firemen. These were your employees. The state shouldn't have anything to do with it. The state did change those benefits, but that was on the advice of the actuaries and frankly, the advice of the cities. If you go back to the minutes in 1997 of various committee meetings, you bet the city of Laramie was there. And they all said, yeah, it's rich, let's cut off contributions. They didn't want to keep paying for it. And none of the members wanted to pay for it. It's natural, and they all wanted increased benefits, and everybody, your fire chief was there, several members, I can quote names, I've got a book. You know, they all wanted to put more money to your retirees, and so they did. The real problem and the real tragedy in this case, and the real dumpster fire of management, in my opinion, now I'm getting into my opinion. I shouldn't really do that, but
If you don't want.
It was the failure to react. It was fine as long as things were fine, but when things went south in the dot-com recession, and especially after the Great Recession, you needed to take action immediately, and that was the problem. All this was put into statute, and the board didn't have authority over it. So frankly, the delay, I blame to the legislature. You put something into statute, it tends to be sticky. But there is another perspective out there, just so you understand, is that this is a city problem. And so you get fingers pointing both ways. And other folks say, let it fail. It's the pensioners' problem. They asked for this and let it fail. I've heard that from several legislators. That's why this may face an uncertain path in the Senate, especially. Does that, I don't know if that's helpful to you. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that response, and thank you for that.
Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. You brought up a question I was thinking about asking earlier, and it scares me now to ask it. So if nobody does nothing, this thing will go bankrupt.
I believe that's the case, unless the lawsuit to combine Fire A and Fire B succeeds, or if there are other legislative changes, because the legislature could mandate that and just kick the can down the road and have Fire B be destabilized. But I do believe that legally, the statutes are actually fairly clear that the state could let this fund go dry. And my attorneys tell me that I don't have the authority to use any other funds to pay those benefits. So the checks would deplete in June of 2026. I do believe that's true, absent any other action.
Councilmember Schuster, follow up. Other questions for Mr. Swindell? Mr. Swindell, I think that you're probably well aware of, as you've mentioned, the diversity of opinion that exists about this topic. I don't believe you came here tonight to get a ringing endorsement of this plan from the City Council. You won't be receiving one. I believe we'll be communicating aspects of our perspective to our Albany County legislators and the legislators that represent the City of Laramie. I'll be frank with you, and perhaps you might consider sharing this with some members of the board there, that some members of this council, and certainly myself, have some problems with this solution. Yes, it's a solution that's better than some solutions, but it's problematic for reasons that you've probably heard articulated to you by other people that share my position on this. I think you illustrated well two of the perspectives out there. One is that this is the state's problem, they created it. Two, that this is a city employee problem and the state has no responsibility. And certainly, you can weigh those arguments. There's probably a third, fourth, and fifth perspective about this as well. What troubles me as an individual member about this council, and I think there's a few other members here that may share my perspective about this, is that yes, those pensioners deserve more than being left out to dry and having that fund run out. Certainly, that's happened to public employees in other states and in other communities across the United States. It's not like it's something that doesn't happen. It certainly has. My objection is being put in a position where I've got to tell people in Laramie, well, we're going to be on the hook for roughly $200,000 a year, and that's going to impact services because we have to assist the state in bailing out a pension program that was poorly managed, and that because they were city employees, the city has a responsibility for. That's messy, and it's not really something I'm willing to do. And so I have some problems with this. And so I just share that with you because you can probably articulate that to other people that if they ask you, well, what do people think about this? I understand there are representatives from the cities that have gone to committee meetings and had a different view than my own. I did find it interesting at the last WHAM meeting I attended that they don't intend on adopting an official position on this for a couple of reasons, one of which being the number of municipalities involved is relatively small, which makes sense to me. And that of those that you mentioned, not all of us are necessarily in accordance with this legislation.
Mr. Mayor, I certainly understand, and I know there's a couple of legislators that are concerned about the impact on cities, and they think the state ought to pick it all up. And we'll see how that fight plays out.
Right.
I don't want to mention any names, but there's a couple of influential senators that share your exact opinion, and I believe the city of Rock Springs, as a city, shares your views. It's a difficult situation. I do think that there are legislators that think there ought to be a benefit cut, maybe not to zero, but one method is instead of $20 million from the cities, you need to cut the existing benefit, by 10 or 15%, basically removing the COLAs for the last, 5 or more years, and put it back on the pensioners, and that's a view too. There are some legal issues with that, perhaps. There would be a lawsuit. I don't know how it would play out because the legislation, the statutes tend to say that the the responsibility of the state is limited to the contributions in the fund. It's not clear that they have the authority to backtrack on the benefits, because there's another section of the law that says once the benefits are awarded in Fire A, they cannot be removed by the legislature. That's in statute too. The statutes the lawyers have told me the statute's actually fairly clear. I think the legislature could let the fund go dry. They may not be able to reduce the benefit from the current level, other than the COLA going forward. That has put the pensioners in a bit of a box. If you don't play ball with us on the COLA, then we will let it run dry. I think that is the JAC's view of it.
Well, I appreciate very much your candor with us and your matter of factness. I think you've given us a pretty good and well-rounded picture. And certainly, I understand that your role is to try to find solutions to problems so that the pensioners aren't placed in some of these very difficult worst-case scenario positions that you've outlined to us. I mean, that's well understood and appreciated.
Yeah, my preference, the board's preference, is some sort of solution where the pensions don't go to zero. Beyond that,
absolutely,
and that's kind of everybody, kid gloves. And this really is one of those public policy issues that I'm sure all of you have dealt with, that at some point nobody's very happy about it. But if everybody is equally unhappy about it, it might have a chance of the coalition to hold together. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
I think if we have to live with some version of this, I think I'd like to see a little bit more flexibility in the loan amounts and the payment scheme or schedule. I mean, that might be something that could be acceptable. I don't know. I see I've got some other questions here. I want to go over to Councilmember Gabriel real quick.
Thanks again, Mayor. I was just curious, David, have you heard any possibility of some of the cities decide not to fund this or agree to their compensation of the 143 or whatever it's going to be per year from the city, that the state could possibly withhold some funds?
That is provided in the existing legislation, and there's precedent for that. I think the city manager put it pretty well. This is a forced loan and a forced repayment. The legislature has ultimate authority over cities, and I know what that feels like. It always seemed to me when I went to the State House in Idaho that we were always under the gun. The legislators talked about powering down and local government, but when it came to push comes to shove, they always wanted to retain authority for themselves. I do think that there's some flexibility there. Why not pay it back over 25 years? How about 30 years? Senator Hicks put in another $5 million. If he feels that way and wanted to make it more robust, why doesn't the state assume that risk? They're better able to do it than the city of Laramie. So cut the amount down to 15. Let's share that. There's lots of arguments on this, and probably a number of perspectives. I do think, in my sense, in working this for several years, there's enough legislators that feel that the cities, and they usually use that term, there's 6 cities and 3 county elements, but they especially look to the cities saying this is your problem and you got to have some participation in it, and they look for that. Whether or not, but there are some legislators that share the perspectives that Mayor Weaver pointed out, that, hey, we didn't have authority over this thing. If the city of Laramie had had their say, one could argue we would have cut the COLA back a long time ago, and we never would have agreed to all those increases in benefits. We would have done something back when the fund lost its surplus back in the .com era. Now we're being held hostage to legislative inaction, and that's not our problem. That'd be the State House's problem.
Well, and who's to say that the city would have made those hard choices, right? We might like to sit here this evening and say, of course we would have made those difficult choices. You could also argue that we would have done the easy and politically expedient thing as well. I'll say this, Mr. Swindell. I think if this turns into a situation where the city of Laramie really needs to grapple with some variation of this legislation coming forward, it has that legislative support, it has that community support. I would really hope that some of these options could be explored about repayment schedules, some of the aspects of the way those loans are constructed. I think I did hear you say that the treasurer's office is going to be given a great deal of administrative authority over how some of these things are structured. I can tell you, running that tight budget situation that Laramie does, any flexibility, any type of options we can look at to figure out how we might be able to structure those is going to be a better solution for us than simply being on the line for this repayment amount starting at this date. There you go. I also want to make a quick comment too, because I don't think I'm going to weigh in again on this, that I've always thought Pocatello and Laramie, Wyoming had some similarities. I would agree. They're both college towns in these Mountain West states. I've been to Pocatello and I've had friends from there. Anyway, that's my little sidebar, and I apologize.
Yeah, both railroad towns and both with state universities. Idaho State, although Idaho State was not maybe as large and didn't have the same influence on the city that UW has on Laramie. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
But I'd sure love to see the discussion maybe explore some more options, a little more flexibility within this framework. And if we're going to have to live with it, maybe there's a better way to live with it than the legislation as written right now. Councilmember O'Doherty?
Yeah, I was pretty astounded when you said that we'll be paying into this until 2082. So is there any length of time a spouse has to be married to a pensioner, or could a 20-year-old marry an 80-year-old pensioner?
There's a weakness in the I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Doherty.
Go ahead.
There is no limit right now. If we had a 73-year-old retiree divorce and marry a 40-year-old spouse, then that 40-year-old spouse is entitled to 100% contingent annuity when that retiree passes. I have mentioned this to the legislature, and that is one amendment that I believe will be offered by Representative Stiff in the House, is to fix that and saying we're going to keep our promise to the existing spouses, but no more. Everyone's retired now, and so no new spouses. But that's also an issue because the pensioners regard that as their right to remarry and have this insurance benefit. But we'll see where that one goes. Right now, that is a weakness in the plan language. This plan has a lot of issues, and that's one of them.
Councilmember O'Doherty, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, I see a problem there, because for Social Security, you have to be married at least 10 years to get the benefit. And for us to just marry a 20-year-old when you're 85, and then we have another 70 years of viability.
My understanding is also, and Councilmember Schmeckel, I see your hand. I'll go to you next. I have a little bit of a tack onto this. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but my understanding is that people can also, through divorce settlements and things like that, be entitled to percentages of or pieces of retirement funds that then get split up, and then you start getting into even more murky waters there, which seems to me like it could introduce even further complications to this. But that's a little bit of minutia. I would like to, and I think Councilmember O'Doherty started off on that comment with this. We're going to probably, many of us, reiterate that maybe there are ways to look at this that are less detrimental to current resident taxpayers that represent the vast majority of these communities that aren't involved in this pension plan, where this could be presented in a way that perhaps impacted city services for them less than the current proposed legislation, while still achieving the goal of trying to keep these plans whole or mostly whole in some way. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious if there's been any calculation as to how much these 6 communities in the 3 counties would have been paying from that period from when the contributions ended until the last retiree or retired, what that number might be had they not stopped the contribution. Has that calculation been done yet? And if not, can we get some follow-up?
That calculation, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Schmuckel, how do you, am I pronouncing that right?
Schmeckel rhymes with
First
Fred.
time.
Schmeckel, okay.
Yeah.
That number has been calculated. I've got it here somewhere because LSO went through and they did a hypothetical. The trouble of it is and it's millions of dollars. Both Fire A members and the legacy employers would have put millions of dollars into the plan. And more importantly, as I described earlier, those millions of dollars would have grown into even more millions of dollars because if they'd been provided on time, we would have invested those. And so it's really it's not only the amount of contributions, but it's what it would have grown to with funding. And I believe the number was about $95 million. Okay. And that was the contributions plus the foregone earnings at the assumed 7% rate of return of the system.
Okay. And then if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Slightly different topic here. Let's assume the absurd and unwanted scenario of, we get these retirees together and a picnic and the potato salad is bad and Laramie loses a significant portion of our retirees before the loan is resumed. Is there any action that the city could take to reduce our payment or anything like that?
Mayor Weaver, council member, the proposed legislation provides that the payment will be made in proportion to the number of participants as of, and then there was two debates on this. One is as of the effective date of the act, and then I believe at the JAC hearing they just simplified it and said it's as of 1 April 2022. And so right now you're 37 out of 258.
Okay.
And we'll see what it is, but it'll be approximately that. But yes, if you go down, if you don't lose anybody, if your 37 remains the same and the rest of the population goes down and you go down to 250, your proportion grows. If you lose some of your 37 and the rest of the population stays pretty stable, you may do a little bit better. But it's locked in as of 1 April 2022 in the current draft.
Thank you. My it was like 5 years from now, not before the calculations are made. So thank you for that clarification.
And I'd like to make sure that I understand that right. So it's proportional to your existing members that are participating in the plan, and it remains proportional as members I guess pass away and they're no longer in the plan, and then that's adjusted downwards, or did I hear you say it's the other way around?
And Mr. Mayor, let me clarify. The
Please.
proportion may be different than what it is today, but if the act were to pass, it would be effective. The proportion would be as of 1 April 2022, and that would stay for the life of the loan. It would be
And that
fixed
stays
that way.
static.
Yes.
So as written, that stays static going forward.
Right. There is an argument to be said in a couple of the counties. I think Campbell County only has 3 people, I think, in this plan. So they're kind of a small player, but it's very possible that all 3 of those could pass on, perhaps within 5 years. Let's say that's true. They have no remaining people in the plan, but they're still obligated to make these loan repayments over the remaining 17 years, right? The problem with doing it differently than the legislation is that's pool risk, and nobody knows how long they're going to live, and no entity knows how long their pensioners are going to live. And so actuarially, the fairest way to do it is to assess it, from the inception, and then after you've done that, then it doesn't change. Because you could have those same Campbell County employees could be the last people standing or sitting in wheelchairs, or so to speak. You just don't know.
Well, proportional to agency budget still seems like the city is the one that's getting it coming and going on this current format. In my individual view, other
other questions or perhaps color commentary like I keep making to Mr. Swindell before we let him go? All right. I don't see a lot of hands popping up. Oh, City Manager, did I see you raise a hand?
Mayor, I just wanted to share with you all, I've neglected to point out at the beginning that the draft legislation is in your packet. So if you want to review that, it is there.
Thank you very much. Dave, I do want to thank you for being here. It's been good for us to get this information and have it come from the Retirement Services perspective. And fill us in a little bit about how some of the other communities have reached their position on this. So, stay tuned. Like I said, you probably won't get the sunshine and rainbows. On the other hand, I could see changes to this legislation that keep the general intent intact and get the job done. That might be a little less negative in terms of impact on our community. There could be some things that could be done there, right? There are always options. There are always potential changes and tweaks to legislation. But we do appreciate this presentation tonight. I did note in the email that you hadn't necessarily had a formal pitch and presentation, but it got the job done and it answered some questions for me. So I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Mr. Mayor. I hope that's useful to you and your council. I didn't want to. I've got so many slides, presentations. Actually, it overwhelms even me. I've been dealing with this for too long. I didn't want to bore you with that. Your memo that was in your packet was very well written. Presents the issues as currently. The only difference is it's not a proportion of payments as some previous versions had. So it's not 184,000. It's a proportion of membership. 37 out of 258 at this point. So it's a little different calculation on the repayment. I also would point out that Tim Sullivan, a recovering county commissioner from Albany County, is a member of our board, and he's a local resource that you can talk to on this. And he'd be more than happy he's well engaged in this. He's gotten all of this on the retirement board side. So he's another resource to you that's right in Laramie. And I can come back. Even when you start meeting physically, it's just a hop over the summit. And I'd love to meet with your council, hopefully with a better topic sometime. I would point out that the public employee plan is doing quite well. We're still only about 76% funded, but we're going to hit double digits this year. And that'll take it to 80% funded and on the way up. And your investment results from the retirement system have been pretty strong. If they continue strong, then you'll see increased funding, and these pensions won't be a burden on your future taxpayers.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. Yeah, as I said, all the other information you shared with us tonight. I'm sorry my video's gone out here, but I'm still here with everyone on the phone. So I do want to thank you for your time tonight, and again, your forthcoming and straightforward presentation. We appreciate it very much.
Very good. And thanks for all you do, and best wishes for a safe and happy Thanksgiving holiday. I wish you good evening.
Same to you. Thank you. Council members, that'll take us into the next portion of the work session, which I think we've decided, given that we spent, we've gone a good hour on that first topic, and it was important. I appreciate everybody's questions on that, and I appreciate you putting up with my comments as well. Since we don't have any other guests with us tonight, and we don't have anyone from the census that was able to join us tonight, City Manager, do you still want to go with that order of the work session that we kind of worked out, or do we want to go into trailers now, or do we want to go ahead and just move forward and go into the census next?
Maybe let's just check with the Assistant City Manager. Todd, do you have a preference?
I don't, and actually we've got both Gail and Robert Terry, I believe, on the line. I think it's fair to let those folks go first.
Okay.
That seems reasonable to me, City Manager. Are you okay with that as well?
Yep.
And council members, is everybody good with that? Okay.
Let's go ahead and do that then, and open that next portion of the work session with the trailer and trailer parking.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I will start out on that. Prepared the material in your packet for this work session. The police chief is with us this evening. He may want to chime in, and then also the city attorney as we move through this information. Staff were asked to provide an overview of the regulations that we have in the city for trailer and RV parking on city streets. This was, just to give you a little background, this has been a recurring concern in our community. It's been raised at least 2 times, and we've had at least 2 work sessions with council in the 2010 to 2016 timeframe. And then in 2016, the council actually determined to streamline and revise the municipal code as it pertains to parking trailers and recreational vehicles on city streets. So as you look at your packet, I did include for you the current version of municipal code that is in blue text. You'll see that there are a number of editor's notes where certain sections of this code were stricken and cleaned up, I would say. And I think that the cleanup and the revisions were winning revisions, I guess I would say, in sections 10.36150 through 10.36200. Then in addition, there was a modification made to section 1036.330 of Laramie Municipal Code, and this section pertains specifically to recreational vehicles and trailers and where they are permitted, what certain places in the city they are permitted to park on city streets. So not being certain if you all have your packet loaded, I'm just going to read this section to you. The way it reads is it does say that recreational vehicles and trailers can be parked on the street only if the area in which the vehicle is parked is immediately and entirely adjacent to real property owned and occupied by the owner of the RV or trailer. And then it clarifies that not more than one recreational vehicle or trailer should be parked in the street per residential property owner. So that is how our regulations stand currently. It is not at all uncommon that during the summer season in particular that we all notice the recreational vehicles and trailers kind of popping up around town as people pull them out on a seasonal basis for recreational activities in the spring and the summer and into the fall, usually at least through hunting season in October. When you look at municipal regulations of recreational vehicle parking on streets, it does range from kind of outright bans that say no parking of these vehicles is allowed anywhere on a city street to really very permissive regulations that don't regulate this at all. So with that in mind, I believe that Laramie falls really squarely in the middle of that spectrum with allowing the RVs to be parked only adjacent to an RV owner-occupied property. I think that's an important clarification. I should point out as well that, for instance, if you have a rental property, you would not be in compliance with our ordinance if you parked your RV in front of your rental property. It has to be owner-occupied. As we look at municipal ordinances across the board, it is also not really uncommon for municipalities to require RVs and trailers or oversized trucks, et cetera, to be parked in specified distances back from an intersection. And I offered for you in the packet an example coming out of the city of Cheyenne. The reason that I did this is in talking with the folks who had requested this work session, I believe it was Councilor Gabriel and a couple other folks, it seems that there is a pervasive concern in the community about RVs encroaching on intersections and impeding sight distances or the ability to see and how far one can see down the intersecting lane of traffic. So I did include in green text for you an excerpt from Cheyenne's municipal code, which seems very practical and is a good example of what you see as you look at these kinds of ordinances in the region and around the country. What their ordinance says is that RVs can park on the street so long as the RV isn't within 30 feet or less of an intersection, and it can't be encroaching on the drive lane of the street that it's parked in, which is pretty common sense. That ordinance goes on to allow that if there are specific situations where that more general 30-foot requirement is problematic, then the Cheyenne Municipal Code empowers the city engineer to designate and or prohibit parking by signage in those specific instances. And if you read through this section of Cheyenne's code, this isn't something that they've done just for trailers or RV parking on the streets. They've noted that, you know, particularly what it stood out to me as is that in historical areas where maybe you have one-way streets or narrow and historical road sections, that these were sort of the prime areas where the city engineer may need to step in and further refine beyond the general allowance for parking not within 30 feet of an intersection. So this section of Cheyenne Code is a lot longer, but that's the gist of it, and I won't read all of that to you. Certainly you can pull it up in your packet materials. But if you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them. I offer the Cheyenne example as perhaps one very straightforward and simple way to address some of the concerns that I understood councilors have heard over the summer. And if there are other concerns, I'm not aware of them, but we could certainly address them in a subsequent work session if need be. So with that, I'll stand for questions. And of course, the chief is here as well, and the city attorney if you have questions that I can't answer.
Sounds good. I see we've got Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you very much. You have two microphones on. That happens to me here in chambers. If I have both the computer and the other microphone on, you get a terrible echo. Been on council a long time. Everybody knows that, and kind of do some history thing. This is the fourth time this has come up since I've been on council. It kind of does cycles and things like that. Also, there was one time when even our chief of police says, do you want me to enforce the trailer laws? And the council took a straw vote and said, no, don't worry about it, because it's not that bad. So here I am, and I'll just admit this. I have both a really nice car trailer and I have a really nice long camper. Are either one of them on the street? No. I have made arrangements, so the only time if they're on the street is because it's parked in front of my house, hooked to the back of my truck, because I'm loading it to go out camping for the weekend, hunting, all those things you said. So in some of our previous ordinances, there was a 3-day allowed to be in front of certain districts that said we don't want campers, just to be able to load to get them ready to go out that weekend. So going to just kind of update you on that. If you go to different sections of the cities, the rules actually change for different parts of the city. So it was just the wildest things that when we put in a subdivision, sometimes there was an anti-trailer law in it and sometimes there weren't. So we do not have a clear-cut code for the entire city. And then I think in parts of the city, you may have a heck of a time enforcing the trailers, because we can't even enforce junk cars in part of sections of our city right now. So how are we going to enforce trailers and put another law in the books for the police department to enforce? Thank you.
Your microphone. You can press *6. You are unmuted.
I think I'm gonna have to call back.
But let's go ahead and keep the discussion going. I don't know who's next. Go to Councilmember Gabriel, and council members, I'll join you again shortly.
Thanks, Mayor. One of my concerns came up a couple of months ago when I talked to City Manager Janine, and she said, you know, I told my concern of the intersection, trailer parked right on the corner. You can't see around it. You have to go halfway into the intersection. And so Janine said, call dispatch. So I did that, told dispatch my concern. They sent a police officer out. He came back and told me very nicely, the trailer is parked legally. It has legal registration. I cannot do anything about it. I concur that it's a situation that probably should have something done, but in his opinion, the police officers, he could not do anything about the trailer parked right on the corner. And so, it just seems to me that it's a very high safety issue that needs to be resolved, because there's no way you can see at that corner intersection.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Sounds like everybody wants to weigh on this, so I'll just keep going around. The next person I have is Councilmember O'Doherty, and then I'm looking for the next person after that. Go ahead, Councilmember O'Doherty.
I'm just wondering if the one you're citing, Councilor Gabriel, was at 25 feet from because isn't that the rule that everything has to be at least 25 feet from the intersection? I would like that to be enforced at the very least. Thanks.
More questions or comments? I think we'll probably give the Chief of Police a chance to talk to us about this too. And I also want to say that, like Councilor Schuster and probably a couple of others, I remember talking about this. I don't know, 2014 or 2015. We had a big involved discussion about it, and that was just one of the most recent discussions about it. They've kind of been ongoing. Council members, I don't see any other hands popping up right now. I wonder if we might engage the police chief a little bit on this topic and about some of the challenges around enforcement and how that intersects with policy. Chief Stalder, if you're okay, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I remember some of what you shared with us a few years ago.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, Councilor O'Doherty, to your direct question, there isn't a setback right now. A trailer or a vehicle or anybody can't block the crosswalk, which is that intersection off of the sidewalk into the streetway. So anything past that, if they're set back off the sidewalk, that's legally parked, and it doesn't matter if it's a self-contained, a fifth wheel, a short trailer, big truck, or anything else. So to that specific question, and I think Councilor Gabriel's specific example, and you're welcome to take a look at it, is at 13th and Spring Creek, and that guy's actually got a fifth wheel setting out entirely in front of his property, but it doesn't violate that blocking a crosswalk, and he's actually gone to the extent where he's put a couple of traffic cones out there around it so maybe people don't run into it or whatever. And that one's problematic because it's right at the pedestrian crosswalk for Spring Creek School. So although it's problematic, it's currently legally parked. And I'd answered direct questions, but this discussion focuses on site triangles. One of the things I've told the city manager and the city attorney in the lead up to this discussion is that unless the city is willing to go out and either sign or mark these corners to where it's clear that it's no parking, my concern about anything that council might do is that I don't want to get into what I have coined as enforcement by tape measure, because I think that challenges all of us. So unless we have the capability in certain areas of town or generally all around town to mark our intersections with a 20 or 25 or whatever foot setback that is, I don't want to get into that argument. I also hesitate to get into the argument, and it's done in other cities where if a police officer makes a determination that a sight triangle is in jeopardy, that they could cite or warn or mark that trailer to move back. And I don't want to put my police officers in that dilemma either, because I don't think that, what Councilor Gabriel or myself considers a inappropriate sight triangle may rise to that level with one or more of my officers. So I'll leave it there unless there's other questions.
If there'll probably be some other questions, but I appreciate that. Other questions around this topic, or really ideas that you want to talk about right now? It does come up. Does cause some safety issues occasionally. Yeah, Councilmember Gabriel, go right ahead.
You bet. Thanks, Mayor. I think that Chief Stalder has probably the answer when you're talking about intersections. You look at 14th and Lewis, for example. There's a reason that there's a big, long, yellow zone there, because it's a pedestrian crossing to go to the lab school and the university. Other intersections around the city, I don't see why there should be such a difference, because once again, so many of these intersections, one cannot see unless you get out into the intersection. And to me, that is a big safety concern. And so I don't know why we have some that are marked yellow for so many feet, and then others, we just let them go. There should be some kind of standard, it seems to me, for the safety of our citizens.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Do we have some? Yeah, I'd like to recognize the city manager to maybe. I see you've got the hand raised. I mean, is that okay? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was purposeful. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
I have to wade in here a little bit, Council. I agree wholeheartedly with what Councilor Gabriel said. From a professional standpoint, it's never made sense to me why we don't have a standard setback. That's not the right word. That's a planning word, but the chief used it and we all know what it means. But a standard distance back from an intersection whereby the curb is yellow and nobody will park. But that's a Laramie artifact, and I don't know why or how. We've all inherited that, but we have. But I have to bring to your mind some examples where routinely over the years, just even in my time around here, which has been, pretty substantial at this point in time, 10, 15 years, when the engineering and public works staff have gone out to deal with setbacks from intersections, it has very often impacted parking. And I said the P word, I'm sorry. That's definitely kind of a four-letter word in our town, isn't it? But when we put in place a general guideline like that of 20 feet or 30 or 25, it absolutely will not only impact RV and trailer parking, which is our discussion tonight, but it will also take out on-street parking. And we all have fresh battle wounds over the removal of parking spots in this town. So I do believe that we need, and I would recommend to you, that some kind of standard setback is important. The chief touches on an important operational issue, which is if you impose something like that and we go out and start striping corners, it's going to take our staff probably a couple seasons to complete it across the board in this city. And it will undoubtedly be a little bit more of a heavy lift in terms of enforcement when the paint isn't fresh. But having that regulation on the books, in my mind, would allow for enforcement of unsafely parked vehicles near intersections, whether you make that ordinance specific to trailers and RVs or just across the board carte blanche. It would at least give the police and the rest of staff some tool where we could ask people to push those trailers back if they are in fact impeding people's view and making it unsafe for people to enter the intersection. So I offer that perspective broadly to address all parking. I realize it's a little further beyond the topic you wanted to address tonight, but as the chief said, and to Councilor O'Doherty, we have no requirement like that in code. So it really, you know, what do? You go out and you ask someone nicely to move their trailer, but they're not in violation of the law right now.
City Manager, what I'm hearing is that, I like the way you described it. We have an artifact of a previous approach to corner parking, and it's applied differently across the city. And if we want to make a change to that, that's policy question. It comes back to whether or not the council wants to bring an ordinance forward. And then we also have some information from the chief about exactly how we're going to have that applied, and if we're going to get into enforcement by tape measure. Appreciate that description of it, and what we want our overall approach to be. I'm not staking out a position either way. I'm just kind of summarizing here. Sounds to me like it's a policy choice. We could apply it only to trailers, or we could just say corner parking is out, along with other changes to parking that have been made. I'd like to recognize the chief to raise his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I just want to throw out one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. I think, and I've talked with the city manager and city attorney about this. We have problematic intersections. Even if you set a 25 or a 30 foot or 20 foot setback, and I'll use that term, if you painted all those curbs, and I would urge council to drive northbound through the intersection at 22nd and Sheridan. I go that way on my way home from work a lot. And there's a trailer that's a good 50 to 60 feet east of that intersection sitting on the south side of the street. And it absolutely is problematic to see that westbound traffic on Sheridan. And that trailer's there almost all the time. So I think we're going to have challenges regardless of if we start marking intersections or not. And to what the city manager said, just recently the discussions have come up on 9th Street, especially north of Lewis. And we have no setbacks on intersection there. And we have real site triangle issues just for, smaller vehicles. So this is a difficult challenge for council, I think, and I appreciate the consideration, but point out some of the anomalies, for lack of a better term. At the end of my block, there were fifth wheels parked on either side of 22nd Street. Both pose challenges for me when I go to work or go to the grocery store, just getting out onto 22nd. So it's a difficult question. So I just would urge council to consider, at least from my perspective, the enforcement aspect and make that as practical as possible, regardless of your decisions. Thanks.
Appreciate that, and I think we'd probably be looking to you to help us with that element of it if we do start moving forward. It is a safety concern. It is brought up periodically. I forwarded a couple of months, maybe 6 months ago, not quite that long, an email that I had received about another intersection, an unmarked intersection in my neighborhood, or pretty close to my neighborhood, talking about a similar scenario to the one that Councilor Gabriel pointed out to us a couple of, more recently about this. And it gets back to sort of long-standing issues. Other discussion. I think we know what the move would be here is if we want to try to impact this, then it's changed to ordinance, and then we have to make sure that we're not making it impossible for the police department to enforce it. not saying I have a preference. Yeah, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll just jump in here and say something I've said before, which is we live in a community that has what I call the stop and creep syndrome, where we have to stop at the stop sign and then we have to creep out into the intersection because of a parking, situation, and you just can't see. So, and no matter if it's a trailer or a pickup or a little smart car, you're still stopping and then creeping out into the intersection to look for pedestrians, folks on bikes, other vehicles. It's a common problem in this community. So I would be very supportive of some sort of enforceable ordinance, that really takes all aspects into account and to help with the measures that we've been talking about regarding safety, visibility, sight triangles, and whatever we need to call it, and really work towards that. We're smart people. We've got smart staff, great police chief. We can come up with a plan. I believe we can come up with a plan that may not be 100% perfect, but I think we could bat above 90%. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of data about the frequency with which sight lines are cited in the cause of an accident or anything like that, just to validate how large of a problem this actually is. There's certainly fields that we're talking about a few isolated locations, and I'm curious if a postcard or a phone call or just a neighbor talking to a neighbor might solve this in a much easier and faster process than taking this through any legislative process. And I want quantifiable numbers we can put to this.
Sounds like a question for Chief Stahl. Chief, is that data around? I don't necessarily expect you to have it to lay out for the council right now.
Mayor and council, what you're talking about is a failure to yield, which is, we have a stop sign violation where somebody just doesn't stop. But if it's a failure to yield, somebody can be cited for stopping and then proceeding into an intersection and then causing a crash. I don't think that we could capture data, and I can check on it tomorrow, but I don't think we capture data whether that failure to yield was inattentiveness or whether it was because their sight triangles were inhibited. I don't think that our crash data gets down to that level, but I can certainly check on that because I think it's a really valid question.
If you would look into that for us and see if you can illustrate it for the council's understanding. And of course, I think everybody here recognizes it might not be doable. Because, each accident has its own factors for sure. But
Mayor, my fear is that as extensive as crash data is on the state accident forms, is that the verbal explanation why somebody failed to yield is going to be a narrative fashion versus something captured in a checkbox. But I'll check with accident records tomorrow as well as my staff.
Chief, and I see council members nodding. Councilmember Schuster, I see you, and I'll go to you next. But I want to tack this onto that last piece there. Chief, would it maybe be while you're looking at that, and if your fears are realized, and I suspect they will be, that isn't going to be as crunchable data as we'd like. I wonder if we might see if we've had an increase over time in failure to yield accidents, tracking, over, I don't know, you name the time period, 10, 15 years, because that's a question I was going to ask Councilmember Schuster, which is that this has been a long-standing discussion about parking and parking on corners, but Laramie, even though not by much, has continued to grow. And I just wonder if we're just reaching kind of a tipping point with this, where an old paradigm of pretty permissive parking just isn't going to fly in a city even the size of Laramie, which grows by 1.5% to 2% over time. Councilmember Schuster, I do have you next, but I see the city manager's raised a hand up. I wonder if we might go and see what she
had her hand up
okay.
first, so yes, please.
All right.
Sorry, I didn't need to go next, but I appreciate that. I would offer as well, I think what Dale's trying to say is when folks are cited for failure to yield, it's always the person who stopped and creeped the car entering the intersection or the travel lane. But it also strikes me, in addition to what you said, Mayor, we could look to see if there's any sort of seasonality to the failure to yield crash statistics, if we're unable to go into that narrative data that Dale's referring to and mine that data in any meaningful way.
Yes, hey, Manager, I wonder if we just might try to see some patterns. Go ahead, Chief Stalder, sorry.
Sorry, Mayor. I can work with municipal court and tell you what the trends on that are for the last many years. I just won't be able to say, did you fail to yield because you were on your phone or because you couldn't see around the corner because there was a big fifth wheel there? But I can tell you those citations over time. I'll get that tomorrow.
Well, that might help us, from a policy perspective, start talking with each other in the community about, well, maybe we're here now. We haven't been, we didn't want to be, but we're at a point now where we need to seriously consider some changes. I don't know. Maybe there won't be patterns. Councilmember Schuster, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two things. You kind of stated on traffic accidents, and I don't want to say that people aren't driving as well as they used to, but I've seen a lot more rude drivers. If you've got a long distance and you can see that stop sign. Tonight when I came home, the Reynolds and Fourth, where they have the little turn bulbs there where you can kind of make a right-hand turn easier. I watched a person look at me, and since I was 200 feet back, they must have went through the stop sign at 30 miles an hour. They saw the opening and they shot for it. And the other thing I want to talk about is I have a good friend who's a handyman, and he does a lot of work here in town. He keeps a lot of things in his trailer, and it's always parked in front of his house. It's never in front of anybody else's house, but he has to plug it in tonight to keep it warm, because if his varnishes, if his paints freeze, they're ruined. So I know that the last time this happened, he came up and he said, what are they going to do to me? Are they going to put me out of business? He says, I don't have an alley. I can't put it in the back of my house. I don't have an alley. There's not enough clearance on either side of my house to get it back there. So we have different situations for different trailers. And that's one of the biggest ones that people come talk to me is, this is my business. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go out of business? Somewhere I have to plug this trailer in to keep it heated. So if we change a bunch of stuff, I want to know what to say to them. Do you want one less handyman here in town? We're having trouble finding contractors as it is. What are we going to do? So all kinds of food for thought. Like I said, I believe in being nice. I have enough room in my house. All my kids have moved away. I could easily put one of my trailers in front of my house. I don't. If I had them there for 2 days, oh yeah. Get the trailer there, load up the four-wheelers and go up for the weekend, stuff like that. Yes, I have, but never more than 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. And I think you raise a point right now that that we need to consider, which is that we're having this work session. We're asking staff to get data and numbers for us to take a look at things. I kind of feel like we're headed towards future discussions about ordinance, and I think we need to think about what are we talking about? Are we talking about trailers and recreational vehicles only, or are we looking at a corner parking ordinance discussion that covers all vehicles? Maybe I'm reading the room wrong here, but I think we need to talk about that and give the staff some direction at this meeting tonight. So, Councilmember Gabriel, you're up.
Thanks, Mayor. I remember a situation over by the law school on Willett, and all of a sudden there was a big stretch painted yellow. Now, that was not any kind of ordinance. It was produced because of a safety issue coming around by the arena auditorium. And that just kind of showed up, and I got blasted one day by a worker at UW asking, when I was a counselor earlier, saying, what is the city doing taking out all of that parking by the law school? You know, it was done by Public Works Department for safety concerns. So that's all I'm seeing right now is these intersections that need to be considered to keep our citizens safe.
The city manager, that makes me think about maybe another option here. And I don't know if the council would need to adopt this by ordinance and make it a part of city code, but could there be a thought towards prioritizing intersections for safety based on traffic data and then saying, look, these things are going to be yellowed on these corners, and it's going to apply to intersections that meet this criteria, maybe not necessarily everywhere. I don't know that that's, you know, it's not a uniform policy, but maybe it gets at the safety issue. I suppose the council could pursue that as well. Would that need to be adopted by ordinance? And then I'll go to you, Councilmember Cumby.
Mayor, I think that's a well-placed question. Certainly Public Works staff could evaluate and make recommendations for certain parts of town or for certain roadway types like arterials and collectors. And you'll recall in the beginning of this, I mentioned that if you look at Cheyenne's code title that deals with these things, they actually note certain streets as being accepted from certain standards for parking, standing, and stopping, as the municipal code says. And a lot of those tend to be down by the Capitol. It appeared to me, I mean, I'm not an expert on their code, but it appeared to me a lot of them were down by the Capitol. They were, as I said, historical streets, which tend to be more narrow. They were one-way streets in and near the downtown area. So if you would like Public Works to look at that and see if they would make recommendations based on those kinds of characteristics, or the classification of the road as arterial collector, meaning it carries more road traffic than would a local street, or for proximity to school zones and crosswalks, things like that, I think that would be a viable assignment that they could look at, and we could bring back some recommendations.
Thank you, City Manager. Council members, I think we need to communicate to each other and the staff if that's another track we'd like to take here. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Cumby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this topic of designating certain streets, I live at Park and 15th, and it's extremely difficult to merge from one of the east-west roads onto 15th Street because the vision is obscured, and I wind up getting honked at and getting inappropriate hand gestures and things like that. And so anymore, I turn around in Park and then go over so that I can get onto Sheridan. So I won't even pull out onto 15th because people park so close and so densely on 15th that you cannot see it all. And then you're right out in the road, and thank goodness I haven't had an accident. So I think that if we base it on traffic patterns, then we would have a standard. That if a road has a traffic pattern that exceeds XYZ, then we enforce the 30 feet for safety reasons. So I think we could do something like that without it seeming arbitrary, that we do have a standard and a measure. And I think there are some major streets that cause a predominance of these kind of difficulties. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, council members looking to get the staff some clarity on what direction we want to go. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am just wondering, I guess hoping that this will come back to council. I think, engineers are obviously tasked with designing to the professional standards outlined in, the green book, et cetera. And we will likely need to, in some way, diverge from that recommendation if past experience is any indication. So I think it would be our responsibility to sort of sit in the middle of that conversation. So I just was hoping that these recommendations would come back to council. I don't think it's fair to engineering to just send them out and and sort of deal with the blowback from there. What is their professional standards, but may not fit some of the older neighborhoods in Laramie, just scale wise.
Yeah, Councilmember Harrington, I think we heard from the city manager using that Cheyenne example. There is sort of a model out there for adopting kind of specific bits of code to deal with this safety concern in certain areas, but maybe not necessarily say, hey, it's hard and fast across, every intersection in town. Other comments on this? Are we favorable to this direction that seems to be emerging, which is to take a look at some numbers from Public Works, some of the stuff that we've asked the chief of police to get for us, and then revisit this and see which direction? I see Councilmember Harrington, you've got a follow-up, so I'm going to go back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been, and the city manager is well aware of this, and likely the chief as well, but I've been having pretty consistent conversations with a constituent that's dealing with not an RV, but just sort of a box trailer, cargo trailer, parked not in front of their property, but across the street. Just so happens to be municipal property across the street, or maybe UP property. Regardless, I guess what I'm curious about is can we, I would love to know the rest of your opinions on enforcing based on, enforcing the trailer regulations that are already adopted in code based on, just on a complaint basis.
Go ahead, Chief Stoller.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilor Harrington, this is an issue that's really surfaced, I'd say, in the last year or so, and I've worked with the city manager's office on a consistent basis when we have trailers or other vehicles parked adjacent to city property, be that a park or other property. Then we're communicating on a regular basis. And then either the city manager or assistant city manager make a recommendation to us to mark that for the 24-hour ordinance. Now that we have a clear ruling from the prosecutor's office that trailers fit into that vehicle description. So we're working through those on a regular basis now, case by case, and I have consistent communication with either Janine or Todd on managing those situations. So I think that one's being taken care of now, whether it's in the adjacency or next to a park or something like that.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, that sounds great. So ignore my question, Council.
Other input on this one? One more work session topic to go this evening. I just want to kind of do that check and see, are we getting to a point here where the guidance that we're seeking from staff is traffic pattern information, trends in failure to yield accidents, and whatever we can glean from that, whatever's available there in a digestible format. And then we'll revisit this topic and consider possible code changes. If I'm wrong about that, now's the time to let me know and the staff folks know. But I think that's where we've arrived. Yeah, I see nodding heads and thumbs and things like that. So staff, I guess that's the next step. Is there anything that you need clarification on from your council people?
Mayor, I do not, and we will plan to be back late January, early February with another work session. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, it does to me, and it looks like the council folks are feeling the same way. So, yeah, okay. City Clerk?
Mayor, I was just going to mention the public comment periods at the end of each agenda item for work sessions now. But that's all that I had.
Sure, and I think I probably forgot to do one at the end of Mr. Swindell's presentation on the retirement, and I apologize. I hope there wasn't anybody there. But let's see if there's a public comment at the end of this item. I do apologize for missing that public comment period earlier on retirement. My laptop was out. My phone was on, but my laptop was out, so I didn't even think to do so. I was worried about getting back on. Do we have any comment? I do see we have a frequent member of the public with us, but Ms. Snook does not appear to be raising her hand to weigh in on this one. So I think we'll move on to the next. Oh no, she is. All right, let's recognize Judy Snook.
Okay, just a quick comment. I would love to echo, and thank you, Mayor, for letting me speak. This is just me as a private citizen, okay? I echo what Jane said. The stop and creep is one way that I survive getting on to Corthell from my neighborhood. They're wonderful people. They're wonderful neighbors. They're very friendly, but they have this trailer thing that has four-wheelers on it, and you can't see, and the fact that the people up the street from them, just next door, have other trailers and big trucks, and it makes it extremely difficult to see what's coming up or down Corthell Road, which is indeed a collector street. And so it is a concern, and I love it when they park in front of their house because it doesn't interfere with anybody or the traffic. It's just a safety issue. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Judy, and we appreciate your comments on that topic. And I think we're going to talk about it some more here in a few months. We'll see if there's something we can come up with. Council, do you want a quick break, or do you want to just keep going? Yeah, keep going from Councilmember O'Doherty. Does everybody just want to keep going? Let's go to our next work session topic, which is the census update items. And I think we've got Assistant City Manager Feeser for that one. So we'll go.
Mayor, that's correct. I am going to have Nancy drive the presentation while I do a little bit of discussion. I'm going to warn you up front that we're a little bit out of cycle with this presentation, and that'll become a little bit more clear as we look at the key dates related to the census information. But I think this is going to be a nice recap of the information and a nice recap of some of the work our city staff, who is just, again, I've said it before, is just so amazing to work with, that I think you're going to be pleased about some of the information you're seeing, and then it's going to leave you scratching your head on some of the other information. And we'll talk about it and we'll get through this process. I don't believe this is a super long presentation or discussion item for you guys. So Nancy, if you'll go to the next slide. Yeah, I don't know that a lot of you really need a big recap, but keep in mind that by the Constitution, the census is open from March 12th to July 31st, or roughly the middle of March to July 31st every year. Census Day is on April 1st. And, it goes without saying the coronavirus had a major impact. The enumeration was difficult. The University of Wyoming students left town. Events and gatherings, planned assistance to complete the census count was all hampered by the pandemic concerns, whether it was the enumerators trying to knock on people's doors, or trying to get people to sign up at the library or host an event at the farmer's market. It just didn't lend itself well to getting the education out. And that was really the beginning of all the Zoom era, and it was uncomfortable and it didn't go super well. And it was just difficult. So that's basically the time. By the Constitution, the census is supposed to submit the count to the president by December 31st, and then they're supposed to release the information. And keep in mind that I believe the census has been so affected by the pandemic that we didn't even actually see a final count. And I'll even explain to you now that we haven't even been able to see an official count. What we've got is a count of blocks that our own GIS analyst, Sean Kraft, has calculated to kind of come up with what our percentage population is right now. It's just been very difficult to find that information. So Nancy, if you'll go on to the next slide. So the 2020 census results, and based on the information released in August, and again, Sean Kraft's work, we came up with a population of about 31,400. That number on the right, the 30,816, is what our census was at in 2010. Now, Mayor Weaver, you said that Laramie traditionally grows at 1.5 to 2% annually, right?
That's what I believe I've heard in the past.
Yep, and that's probably a pretty fair assessment. And a 1% increase across the 30,816 would be a little bit over 3,000 people. So the number is really glaring that there's obviously a count issue or something that was really kind of difficult for Laramie, and I would put it almost entirely on the count of UW and the effects from the pandemic. Nancy, if you go to the next slide. Now, this is where I kind of broke down some of the calculations. And if you see that little blue line on the bottom, that would be the actual census growth at about, I think it was 0.06% or something like that. That's based on the 2010 census to the 31,400 in 2020. And it's a pretty standard line that it gives there. Now, it doesn't show a whole lot of growth. Now, based off the estimated census growth, if we started at 30,816, then I base this off of the 1% growth. We should have been about 34,040 residents, and that's that top line. Now, that middle line that's a little bit squirrely, that's out of the census's data. That's called their population estimate program, and it actually shows increases and decreases. It's based on births and deaths and house starts and, different pieces. And that's why that is strictly an estimate number that's derived from the 2010 census, estimated out through 2020 on where you should be. So you can see there's certainly a drastic change on where we need to be as far as our count's concerned. Nancy. So some takeaways that we go with, and I use this. I believe that Laramie averages about 1% growth over the past years. The census number was heavily impacted by the pandemic. Now, where the correct census count is so imperative to the city of Laramie is the state direct distribution is oftentimes based on some kind of a population number. One of the things that I thought about today as I was thinking about the direct distribution number is there's a chance we might see a cut But if we have good census numbers, that cut won't feel as bad because we'll probably see some increase in census numbers. So that there's a plus and a minus to all those. Federal awards, the amount of federal awards that could be awarded to Laramie are based on the census numbers. When Joe Hortzer was giving us our presentation, the census had estimated that a 1% undercount could cost the city of Laramie $480,000 of their fair share of federal distribution. Well, if we're 8% undercounted, which I estimate that we are, that could mean $3,840,000 annually that we would not be available for in federal funding. And then one at the bottom that Nancy Bartholomew brought up today is if we do get over 32,000, we get another liquor license in Laramie. So that's something to really look forward to, right? That's lighthearted at this point. But Nancy, if you'll go on to the next slide. So Sean Kraft took all the information, and the census is broke down by blocks. In this scenario, green is where we show growth. Red is where we show a negative census count, and purple is one that stayed the same. So you can see that we've got a varied mixture of red and green. One of the things that you really need to keep in mind is that two apartment complexes, the Verge and what's the one off 30th? Is that the Point? The Verge and the Point, they weren't in place in 2010. And so they show up a little bit differently in the census. But as you go into this map, which I can share with all of you, you can, if you go to the next slide, it'll show you what the number change is from 2010 to 2020. And I actually zoomed in this section because I thought the area that's east of 15th Street and south of Spring Creek was kind of interesting because it's mostly apartments and rental places. And if you notice, it shows a significant decrease in count, well over 100 people decrease in the count. Now, there are some new buildings down there that accounted for a positive in the increase, but to me, it doesn't pencil out to be the same. Those apartments should, in my mind, have still been resided in throughout the census count as we move through. And so that was a big shocker. Now, if you look at on the right-hand side screen, you see that number that's 470. That's obviously because of the Verge. If you see the number 290, that's just a little bit down and to the left of the 470, that would be because of the Point. But if you think about our large non-owner occupied housing rentals, and you overlay that in the areas that you're looking at, you can really see where there's a significant decrease in some of the areas that I would say are directly related to University of Wyoming students that may have potentially left town and just simply not counted in the appropriate fashion. If you go on to the next slide, Nance. And Nance, I'm going to have you flip back and forth. So this is a heat map that was created that showed non-owner occupied densities, and the purple is the dark area where we have non-owner occupied densities. And if you look at this map, the purple shows where we should have had heavy rental or maybe student counts. Now, if you go back to that previous map, Nancy, it seems to coincide with all those red numbers really bunching up around the rental area of the university and the different rental areas to me. And so I think we've got good information that shows that we could potentially do pretty well if we did go for a count correction or even a potential special enumeration process that Councilor O'Doherty had brought to our attention just last week. So Nancy, if you'll skip 2 slides ahead. So the first section is the census count question resolution operation, or census count question resolution operation. Some of the key dates to remember is December is when the census plans to officially notify us that we're eligible to file for this question resolution. And between January 3rd and June 20th of 2023, that's our deadline to submit for this question resolution count question resolution operation. And then by September 30th, they have to give us the results of that. Now, I still don't have a lot of information because the census, they sent me numerous articles, and they keep sending me the same articles over and over that don't really outline how this happens yet. And I think we'll get that in December, which of course is next week. There's two types of CQR cases, and to me, the count cases is the one where it says they can review the geographic location or placement of housing and associated population, as well as census results to determine whether census processing errors excluded ballot housing and associated population data. To me, that's exactly where we lie. I think we have a problem with the count as it relates to the census. And Nancy, if you go on to the next slide. I do have one caveat, and this is the interesting thing about the census, and that's a census map representation of the city of Laramie. And I think you've all seen enough of our maps that doesn't at all look like what the city of Laramie's boundaries look like. But they also show us with the population, when you go in and look at Laramie, of 34,909, which is completely different than the 31,400. And if there's any chance that that number is real, if I can verify that with our census representative, then we wouldn't have to go through the count resolution process. That would be in line with our projected growth. But I still have been unable to get much response with the census. And as much as I want to be frustrated with that part of the process, I couldn't imagine an organization that every 10 years blows up to 100 times its normal size. And then by the time it's over, it shrinks back down to 1% of its normal size. It's got to be a super difficult organization to be involved in. But they are responsive, and I think our gal, who's out of Denver, is simply on vacation this week, and will get back to me in December when we get there. I know that's not a lot of deep information. It's probably not as fluent or as fluid as you would like to know, but at least gives you some information, lets you know that staff is still continuing to effort this. We have lots of great information related to the census count, and be happy to try to answer any questions you may have, or I'm here to help, or I can ask questions of our census representative too. I stunned everybody. Nice.
I appreciate this. I think actually it was a perfectly good update for us at just the right level, Todd, so no worries there. I'm going to recognize Councilmember O'Doherty.
So at the National League of Cities meeting, I attended the University Communities Council meeting. And of course, all university communities are dealing with the same issue. So the NLC has been researching it very carefully. And the conclusion that I drew, and I would like you to watch that session if you can, is that unless it's like you had this part not, like if the verge was not included in Laramie's geography, then we would have a basis for that to contest it. But if it's just, we know there were more people there, but they all went home, they explicitly said that is not a basis for contesting the results. But several communities reported that it was worth it to them to do a special census. So I guess that becomes your new number, but the city has to pay for it. And I passed it on to Janine and Todd about the cost of that. Was one of the cities in the Research Triangle. It's completely surrounded by universities, but this municipality is inside, and they know they've gone from industrial to residential, and they knew that they'd grown a lot, but the census was not showing that. So they did a special census, and they figured it paid for itself within a year because of the money that that was available to them. So depending on how this shakes out, I think it's a solution for us, but we can't do a special census for it might be our only way out. So I'll share that link. I don't know how it works getting to watch the sessions, but it's very informative. But every university job is dealing with this same problem that we're dealing with. So there's a lot of people that'll have examples to help us out. The other thing I was trying to figure out the yearly community survey census shows in July of 2019, Laramie is estimated at 32,711, but then the census shows 31,407, so about 1,500 people different. So we were talking about things for long-term, for legislation, national legislation, that perhaps we could have something like, if the census count is more than X percent from the annual estimate, that would be a reason to be able to request, a recount or something. Anyway, I'll just throw it out there, and I'll share those links with the city clerk. Thank you.
Honorable Mayor, the special enumeration process that Councilor O'Doherty is talking about is actually closed at this time, and all it says on the census page is that it will be reopened in 2023. So that I'm still unfamiliar with, as that was the only information I could find on the special enumeration process. The website, I wish I could say it was super handy and awesome, but it's kind of difficult to figure your way around.
Go ahead.
So can I fill in what I learned? Sorry, I don't have a voice lately, but what I learned is that you contract through the municipality contracts through the U.S. Census to run this special census. And yeah, there's a period of a couple of years on each side of the census that we can't do it. But I can put us in touch with several municipal leaders that did this and to give us a better idea. Thanks.
Other questions? Council, it seems like what we need to do, and I'll look for the double thumbs up Fonzie or nodding heads here, is schedule this for another work session update. Maybe we'll do it on the same work session as we revisit parking. That'll give staff a chance to kind of get the information pulled together and maybe get more detailed responses about our options moving forward from the Census Bureau, and then we can decide when we have those options which ones we want to use. Maybe there will only be the one, which is what Councilor O'Doherty suggests is going to be the door that's open to us, which is to consider whether or not we want to do a special census, or see if they've promulgated some other options for us, or if they're going to let us fit into one of these other processes. But either way, we'll need, I think, probably another update and another chance to say, okay, let's do this. Yes, Councilmember O'Doherty.
I wanted to add one more. The good news, a lot of the ARPA funds were tied to that. I keep looking at my computer, what it's called, that community survey. So it may be that we're saved by the estimate, which is done annually. That might help us. But might we ask our legislature to take it back? Well, they've made it pretty clear they don't want to help Laramie, but if we say, instead of tying it to the decennial census, could you tie those things to the community survey? Sorry, I'll stop talking now. I learned a lot in that session. Thanks.
I think that's all been useful information. Right. So what we want to do is get more updates when the census staff people around are able to work with the staff and look at this topic again, and then maybe we can decide, okay, well, we have to go the special census route, or see if there's been something else open to us and revisit it, and then provide direction. There's a little bit of there's some missing pieces right now. Does that sound about right? Okay. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, my question is mostly for Aaron. Are you talking about the American Community Survey?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. No, that's actually a pretty good source for all sorts of information. including workforce, wages, population, ethnicity, all sorts of demographics are gathered by that particular survey. It kind of makes sense that those numbers might be a little more on the spot or on the ball or closer. But anyway, I'm supportive of having another work session when we can have another update, and certainly do what we can to get our numbers as true as they are and as we know they are. So, yeah, thanks.
You bet, Vice Mayor. It seems like our problem is our most frequent American Community Survey results deviate substantially from what our official census results may end up shaking out to be, and we know that doesn't really match up with our own numbers that the city kind of tracks for our own reasons. That there's Todd laid it all out for us there. One thing that concerns me is if it ends up being our only option, that we have to pursue the special count process, and that we have to contract to have that done, and then it's $400,000 or $500,000. Yeah, probably over time, what we'll recapture with accurate numbers will be worth it, but then we'll have that short-term serious problem of saying, okay, we've got to outlay an expenditure to get that done. And I would just hope that there might be some other avenues for that. I don't know. It'd be great if rescue plan dollars were available for that or something, but I somewhat doubt that they are. But that's kind of an unfortunate scenario that I'm a little bit worried about, is we'll have to come up with $500,000 to get the right count. Sounds like that there's some information indicating that that's how it's going to be, but we'll get a future update in a couple of months. Does the February work session seem soon enough for this, or too soon, staff? I guess I'm asking Todd, but
Honorable Mayor, I'd say let's wait until we can get the information on the QCR through the census and give us a chance to digest that, and then we'll let you know through Janine when we'd like to get back in front of you.
Okay, sounds good. Let's just keep it alive, because we know those numbers aren't right. I think that's sort of the basic takeaway here. Or we have reason to believe that those numbers aren't right. If there's any public comment on this topic, before I forget. Doesn't look like it. That'll take us to updates, council updates from boards and commissions. Whoever wants to go first. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I went to a lot of sessions about climate change or what cities are doing, and heard some more ideas, and we're on the radar with the National League of Cities. People know that Laramie's doing good things, so just want to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Councilmember Harrington.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Councilor O'Doherty and I kind of talked through what we would attend at NLC to make sure we weren't duplicating. She took a more environmental path, and I took a housing path through NLC. And I think maybe one of the more, I can send a write-up of a little more detail, but I think for the top level version, a lot of cities are using their GIS departments in pretty creative ways to get a clearer picture of what their neighborhoods look like. And I think that was particularly interesting given some of the recent conversations we've been having as a council. And a lot of those are sort of built on ArcGIS and sort of public domain, really pretty accessible and easy to use sort of mapping technologies. And obviously we have professionals at the city that can get deeper than us, but some of it is easy enough for even us to hop into. And then I think, there was a lot of talk about ARPA funds and things like that. So I will be sure to include a write-up on that. And then another piece that I thought was pretty interesting was using 3D walkthroughs for developments that are, cities were using those for sort of like larger developments that may meet some sort of resistance from a neighborhood, to give people at least sort of like a clear picture of what we're talking about. So that everybody's using that same piece of information and that same visual, to have a more realistic conversation about what the change is proposed. And, I'm sure there's 30 other things I could tell you all about, but just look for an email coming sometime soon.
Sounds good, Councilmember Harrington. Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. Gonna take one of Councilor Smuckle's things because the rifle range is going to have a free day, December 26th. If somebody gets a Santa Claus present that they'd like to try out there. The Historic Railroad Depot is doing good with bookings for Christmas events. The Light the Train is coming up. It was decorated with Christmas lights last year. So that's happening. I'm trying to think of any other committees or anything to update on. Not going to. Nothing else of great importance, but I see that Jane and I did some interviews for Planning Commission. I know that meeting was this week, and I see that there is some Monolith Ranch. I got included on that. If I need to, I will help out on that, but I would hope some people from the Monolith Ranch, people that are on that liaison position, will help on that one too. So, yeah. And the only other ones I'm on is Finance Committee and Youth Conference, which doesn't meet at a convenient hour for me because I still have a full-time job and we are so short on staff. We are begging for employees. So, yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Schuster. Thank you. Other updates? I'll go to Councilmember Gabriel and then to Councilmember Cumby.
Thanks, Mayor. Albany County Tourism Board met yesterday. Tourism is alive and well in Albany County. Receipts are well up, and the budget looks really good for next year for the board. Still looking for a couple of board replacements, 2 from the city. One would be involved in tourism. The other would not have to be a tourism person. And boy, I've been working with Nancy and her staff, trying to get some people to sign up. Last couple of months, we just haven't been successful yet. So if you know of anybody that might want to serve on the tourism board, send them Nancy's way. We need 2 applicants there to fill that. And I think all of you received the email from a realtor in town expressing concern about the planning process and about development and so on. I forwarded it on to our planning director, Derek, and he invited me in for a short meeting. And we met today along with Assistant City Manager Todd. And he kind of went through the process and we looked at some of the items that the email referenced. And it was a very good session. I really appreciate Todd and Derek taking time to do that, to kind of bring me up to speed on how some of these developments actually work and some of the problems that they incur in the planning process. And it was very informative. And I have since sent an email back to the resident that I would hope that she would contact planning and get some of her concerns directly resolved through, Derek's office, because he says he has nothing to hide. It's a process that sometimes can be frustrating because of certain things, not necessarily involving city issues. And so it was a really good meeting today. And I think that's going to finish the update. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Councilmember Cumbie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of updates, one on the Board of Health, and I want to give a special thank you and acknowledgement to Nancy, Bob Southard, and also Cody Talbot for the work that they did on implementing corrections and updates to the rules and regulations of the board. We had some things in there that had not been in effect for 20, 25 years, if ever. It referred to a city health officer, which we do not have a city health officer. We have a county health officer, who is Dr. Elias. And while she served on the Board of Health, then she also was present as the health officer as well as the MD on the board. But now that she is not on the board, it really makes obvious to us that we need to define the articulation between the Board of Health and the Department of Public Health, and how we work together as a city and within the community and the county. So we will be putting together a group and meeting with people from public health and other health agencies to see how we can better work together and what we might do as a city and what to be helpful with that. So that's the Board of Health. Then the Disabilities Board is working on developing goals for the next year, and we have openings for 2 members, and we are seeking to fill that. But we have some interesting things that we're considering, so we will report that probably after the. And the last thing is the vaccination incentive group. And our focus right now is on the child vaccinations and on advertising and working with that, working with the schools. And Rachel from the Albany County Library has taken a very strong lead in that, and the library staff in developing materials, publication materials to help promote the vaccinations. So everything is in process, and that's it on the 3 that I have to report on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those updates. And I think I heard you say that there might need to be some changes to the way we have the Board of Health defined. And
well,
so I guess
we've defined it, but now what we don't have in there is how does the Board of Health articulate with public health? And we feel as a board there should be some sort of articulation, and we need to come together, all of us, and just talk about it and see how we might do that. But in the interim, the changes that have been made, Nancy will be doing the necessary publication and the number of days, and then that will come to council and we will vote on those changes. So Nancy, that's about 40 days out, 45, something like that.
Yeah, it'll be in the future. I'm trying to confirm all that with city attorney.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one quick update regarding downtown. Of course, you all heard the Shop Small presentation at the last work session. So I want to kind of put that back out to the public and remind everybody to visit downtown this holiday season. But I also wanted to just update the council that the Main Street Group and DDA, which is our governmental downtown board, are working together to potentially become more collaborative on a few things. And I think we'll see some things coming forward from that. But I also wanted to say that we are in need of several new members for DDA. And as Councilmember Gabriel had stated, we're just not seeing applications for tourism. The same problem exists for the DDA. So we're certainly encouraging people that are interested. And I would just say for the public, DDA membership is not open to the general public for a board position. You have to work, live, own property downtown. There's a few different ways that you can qualify to be on the board. So, Mayor, that's all that I have for tonight.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We've got to get some people on these boards. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just one quick update. Planning Commission sat a new chair and a new vice chair last night. Our new chair is Evan Townsend, and our vice chair is Chris Moody.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. All right. Other updates? The county city working group for extraterritorial growth areas has been getting some work done, and we'll be finalizing a couple of aspects of the RFP and then looking at the responses we get to that over the next couple of months, and I'll bring you some more updates when I have them. The police and community, the working group for police and community has some upcoming public input meetings that are coming forward, and they've continued their work. The last couple of meetings I wasn't able to get to, but I understand there was some conversation about mental health service expansion and how that might be incorporated into some of what we might see as a recommendation out of that group coming forward about some different strategies modeled after some other communities in the area. So I know those are some things that the group is working on right now, and I would be surprised if those didn't find their way into potential recommendations that are coming forward. I might ask Councilmember Cumby or Councilmember Somerville if they want to add anything to that on those police and community working group meetings, if I missed anything top line important for the rest of the council. Councilmember Cumby, I don't know. I'll go to you.
I think you summarized it. We had taken a close look at the police department process, various things related to that, and then we shifted to mental health. Andy did a very thorough presentation last week. And so we've got a lot of information. The group has developed I think, some pretty strong cohesion when you compare it now with where we were when we first began. And we've got some good conversations going on. So now we are moving toward our recommendations, and the city, we've scheduled the community forums, and those are advertised and upcoming. So we're moving pretty fast on everything because the end came a lot sooner than we thought. So
yeah, the time is moving. Other updates? Hey, anybody want to make additional comments about anything right now? Okay. By way of agenda review, there isn't much except that, of course, there'll be the 5th Tuesday meetings. The city clerk sent out information detailing those, and we can revisit what we hear at our ward meetings. Maybe at the next work session by way of updates or comments, I suppose. Is there any public comment on it? Yeah, Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just wanted to say I tried taking a stab at creating the maps as what I thought I heard Councilors Somerville and Cumbie and Pierce describe. So I will send a link to the city clerk so she has it to share, I guess. I'm not sure. Like an idea for ways to divide the city wards. Thanks.
That would be good because I think we'll need that as a starting point for conversations about proposed wards. So that would be good to have for those meetings. We have a meeting with the legislative delegation and the county commissioners December 1st as well. I'm sure you all know that, and it's on your calendar, but that's upcoming relatively soon as well. Let's see if there's any, and Councilmember O'Doherty, thank you very much for your work on those ward maps based on that feedback and input you received from council members. We really do appreciate it. It's something a lot of us wouldn't have been able to do, so we're really counting on you to do that. And based on what I saw from that draft proposal, I thought it looked pretty good. Look forward to more input about it. Thanks again for doing it. Councilmember Cumbie.
Yes, I would just like to thank Councilors O'Doherty and Pierce for working on that, and I worked with them and I really learned a lot, and I just want to say thank you both very much. It was very helpful.
Yeah, and thanks to you, Councilor Cumbie and Vice Mayor Pierce for work done on that. Go ahead, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, it was really Councilor O'Doherty. She was the magic behind the data points. So thank you, but it's the big thank you to Councilor O'Doherty.
Yeah, she is an expert about that. You can ask other people in other organizations and other parts of the country about that, and they'll confirm it. So I'm feeling pretty confident in her handiwork. She doesn't like to hear these kinds of praises at the meeting. She's going to duck down and hide, but we do mean it and we do appreciate it. And I do have that level of confidence in that. Interested to see what some of the community feedback might be about it as well, because we don't really know until we ask people. So we'll be lucky to have those. Okay, Council, let's see if we have any public comment. I don't think we do, but it's on our agenda. We need to, and I don't want to forget like I did earlier. Councilmember Gabriel and I already made our obligatory UW football comment. Some of the basketball teams have been doing pretty good too. I don't know how that game last night panned out. Do you remember, Councilmember Gabriel? I didn't listen all the way.
The basketball game was great.
They won.
They won. And
good.
It was decided in the last 1 minute. We ended up winning it by about 8 or 9, but it was won in the last minute. They missed a couple, we made a couple, and all of a sudden they started doing their desperation shots and nothing went down. And yeah, but until there was 1 minute left of the game, 60 seconds, it was one heck of a game.
That's good. I listened to part of it. And I'll tell you something, council members. You know, I do think Laramie's pretty intensely proud of the UW football and basketball teams and other athletics. So I think it's okay to give them a little shout out here at these meetings because people follow that stuff. It's certainly important to our local economy. And it's certainly a relief to me that the football team has kind of been turning the season around here the last few games. Hopefully it keeps rolling.
This game this week is...
How about we close...
This game this week is Friday. It is not Saturday game. I hope everybody realizes it. Friday, UW football.
And we're playing Hawaii?
Yes, here.
Brian, it's Saturday at 1.
What's that?
It's Saturday at 1. The Cowboy basketball team plays Friday.
Oh, Pam, my wife told me that it was football Friday.
Nope. 1 o'clock Saturday.
Okay. That's still fine.
The
Let's go to
basketball on Friday, football on Saturday, and let's hope they do really well. We're rooting for them. Council members, I'm rooting for you. Same to the staff. I'm rooting for you guys. Let's close this work session. I want you all to have a really good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next time, okay?